Hey, welcome to Soul Hub. So, in this episode, we are discussing something very important, which is knowing the difference between something that's coming from your ego and is therefore unhealthy and false, and something that's coming from your true self and is therefore healthy for you and right or correct. And this is actually something that is very confusing for a lot of people, and that's because the ego is such an incredible manipulator and a chameleon of sorts. It can pretend to be your true self, and it can really trap you in cyclical behaviors and things that are extremely unhealthy without you realizing it. And the question here comes actually from Robin that draws out this topic very nicely. And Robin's two questions that are very related, so I'll just read them here. Robin says, my question is about releasing the pain of the past through crying all night, for instance, versus being depressed. How do I know when it's a healthy release and when it's a psychological disturbance? And then a related theme is with my question about communication. How do I know whether my opinion that I feel hurt by the way someone is talking to me is valid or based in reality, or if I'm being oversensitive due to the reactive patterns in my brain from constantly being triggered by this person, and yet the person feels that they're communicating honestly and respectfully. So these are very good questions, not simple or easy to understand or to figure out, which I can understand that. And so let me start with the first one about how do you know if something is actually a true emotional release that's healthy for you, or if it's actually coming from the ego and is really unhealthy. It's more of a psychological disturbance, as Robin says, and it's really just a trap. And the way to figure this out is there a narrative attached to what's going on? So let's take your example, Robin. You're talking about, you could be, for instance, crying all night as a deeply healing thing that is beneficial for you versus actually being a result of depression. So how do you know the difference? And the difference is when something like, let's say, crying all night or crying a little, whatever it may be, is actually healing, it doesn't have much of a narrative attached to it. Meaning that something could trigger it. It could be something, seemingly random, or it could be meditation, or it could be shadow work, or whatever it may be. And it could trigger this deeply healing crying, which is actually very beautiful, very cathartic. But as it's happening, there's not much of a narrative going on with it. And what I mean by that is there's not much of this victim identity, like, oh, poor me, and now I'm crying because of that, right? Or this is so unfair, and that's causing the crying. Or, thoughts about anger or how hurt I've been and what happened to me. And so it causes crying. But then what happens is as that more crying takes place, it really doesn't feel good. It's like, on the one hand, you're crying, but on the other hand, you're feeling worse and worse as you're crying. And then more thoughts are coming up. Why? Because these emotions are actually driven by egoic negative thoughts. And so then they produce more of the same thoughts, and it becomes a vicious cycle. And so that's actually not healing. That's actually the opposite of healing. That is creating more inner suffering and solidifying the false sense of self, i.e. the ego, by feeding it more negative emotions, because that is its food, negative emotions, and that is driven by negative thoughts. So negative thought creates negative emotion, and then creates another negative thought, and so on. So then crying could be happening, but it's not a healing type of crying. Whereas the healing type of crying feels very different. First of all, it feels very healing. It feels very cathartic. It doesn't feel like you're getting more depressed. It feels like you're getting lighter. When it's over, you feel clearer. You don't feel drained. You feel clearer. You feel lighter. So that is also kind of what is the effect afterwards, right? It feels different. But then when it's happening, there isn't, at the very least, there isn't a negative narrative, and sometimes there's no narrative at all. There's no inner story going on in your mind. It's just deep crying. Or if an inner story is coming up, it's not one of victimization. It's not one of, oh, poor little me, feeling sorry for yourself, because that's never helpful. It's not self-pity. It's more self-compassion or self-acceptance or self-love. Then you know true healing is occurring. All right? And so that's a very clear way is what is it characterized by? Is it a lot of thinking and narrative and negative thoughts? And how do you feel afterwards? Do you feel drained? Do you feel even worse? Then you know it's the ego. Whereas the true self, it's either positive thoughts or no thoughts at all. It's just occurring, and then afterwards you feel lighter and happier. So that is, a very good way to gauge that. And then your other question is about communication. So this is a little more of a complex one. How do you know? And this can be helpful for so many people. So I appreciate that you asked this question, because in pretty much all relationships, there's going to be arguments, there's going to be differences in opinion. And especially if you're on an awakening path, it's important for you to know, hey, am I, being overly sensitive here? Are my views based in reality, or am I just being triggered and I'm not even aware of that? And so it's really good to understand that. And it's not always very clear, but there are ways to feel into it. And once you have this kind of better, higher, bigger picture perspective, it can be easier to understand. Okay, so let's start with this. You say, if I feel hurt by someone, by the way someone's talking to me, how do I know if that's a valid feeling or, I'm being oversensitive? So I'm going to say something pretty radical here. And but then hopefully you'll understand it in the greater perspective with which I'm saying it. And that's that if you ever feel hurt, emotionally hurt by anything, on the ultimate level, it's never valid. And what I mean by that, I know it sounds kind of harsh, but what I mean by that is that the only reason we ever feel hurt is because we are personalizing something. We are becoming identified as a person and therefore very naturally taking it personally. That's the only time we can actually feel hurt. All right? Whereas if we were being presence, which I'll talk a little more about, if we were being just presence and not a person, someone could say something very hurtful and we wouldn't necessarily feel hurt. In fact, we could just feel compassion for that person or just stay present and non-reactive. So what does it mean to be a person versus a presence? Well, a person means by default, you are identified with the thought stream. You are identified with the thoughts in your head because that is what creates the person that you think you are. I know pretty much all of humanity almost thinks that they're a person. Every one of us, we think we are this person. Whereas I've stated numerous times, and that is the whole crux of anything that, I can call a teaching that comes forth, is that that's not what we really are. That's a small aspect. It's a little character we're playing. What we are is a formless awareness or a formless presence. Formless meaning it has no form. It is just a presence, just an awareness. If you became silent right now, completely silent, both outwardly and inwardly, there's no thoughts, you're just silent. Who are you? Where is this person that you think you are? The person only comes online, only is created the moment thought starts. Because thought goes to the past. Oh yeah, here's my history. Oh, that's me. Future, or here's what I want to achieve, what I want to do. Or here's who I am now. Without thought, where is that? All there is a body sitting here and awareness. That's it. The person is a story. Now that is very hard for the mind to really understand and accept, that the person is a story. But if you really investigate it, if you really start probing with this kind of questioning, this kind of inquiry of, well, if I just let go of my past for a second, let go of the future, and let go of thought, and just be, where is this person that I think I am? You'll realize that the person is just a series of thoughts that are believed. That's it. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. That's what we're here to do. We're here to play pretend a while as spirits, as consciousness, and see what it's like to be a person. That's okay. The only problem is when we take it too seriously and we identify exclusively with it and think that's all we are. And so when it comes to communication in relationships, what happens then is someone says something, and in that moment we're not present. We're not just being this silent awareness inside. We are identified completely as a person with my needs and what I want and what I hate and what I like and so forth, and the need to defend myself, because that's what this false self always needs to do. It needs to defend itself. Why? Because it feels inadequate. It feels incomplete. Because it is seemingly separate. If I'm a person versus a aware presence, then I'm very separate. I can be hurt. Whereas how do you hurt an aware presence that is just there without boundaries? How can that be hurt? How can the true you be hurt? It can't. And so as a person, of course you can be hurt. The psychological person is full of insecurities, all of us. Full of insecurities. So it's so easy to be triggered by another person and feel hurt. All right? But what I was saying, that radical kind of statement that it's never valid from the ultimate perspective, because from the ultimate perspective, the person isn't really real. It's just a psychological contraption. It's a psychological creation that comes online when you're thinking only. And so, who's being hurt? It's the real question to ask yourself. Who's feeling hurt? Who is this? Let me find. Can you find this person that's feeling hurt? Well, you could say, oh, me. Well, who is this me? Well, you could say, oh, me, Robin. For instance, Robin's asking the question. Me, Robin. I'm the one who's feeling hurt. Who's aware of this Robin? Who's aware that you're Robin? Isn't there awareness within you that is aware of the so-called Robin that feels hurt and doesn't feel hurt and that has this issue with their partner or whoever it may be that you're talking about and so forth? Right? There's an awareness. So clearly you can't be that if you're aware of that. There's something more fundamental here preceding that. And so how does this relate into practical terms of what you do? Well, what I would suggest is that you stop trying to figure out who's right. Is my opinion right? Is that other person's opinion right? Is this valid? Is this not valid? Right? Only the egoic mind wants to know who's right, who's wrong. Who's the one that actually has the upper hand. Instead of doing all that, whenever you feel hurt, instantly turn the attention within. Instead of trying to figure out, is this person right or wrong? How could they hurt me? It's always being projected outwards. Turn the attention within, right? And feel what is being hurt. And investigate what is it that's being hurt and why is it that this is being hurt. But don't do it with the mind. Don't try to figure out, well, I feel hurt because of this and this and that. No. Turn the attention within as a sort of inward meditative inquiry and find this hurt entity. Now, what you'll find if you try to find it is you can't find it, because the moment you become that presence or awareness and you're not thinking, it's not there. It's literally an illusion. It's a trap. And so as you do this more and more, you start disidentifying with the person that is hurt, and you start identifying more and more with the presence. You also start projecting blame outward less and less, and taking full responsibility for how you're feeling inwards, realizing that the only reason I'm feeling hurt is because I'm identifying with thoughts of being a person who just got hurt. Now, I'm not saying that person couldn't be saying something that is disrespectful. Of course they could. Or that is just outright wrong or out of the boundaries. Of course they could. But your first job is to turn inwards and see how you are creating hurt and suffering for yourself. Because you can't not admit that despite what they're saying, they could be saying the exact same thing. And one moment you could be feeling hurt, and another moment you could just be an awareness that is seeing that person with compassion, seeing that, they're only saying that hurtful thing because they have pain inside, because they're right now potentially just not clear, right? And that's why they're being hurtful. Or when a person is truly clear about the connectedness of all of us to each other, they can't be hurtful. If they had no suffering inside, they couldn't be hurtful. So you could be seeing it from that perspective. You could also be seeing it just from pure silence and just being sitting there and just not reacting. So you know that you are actually the one that's causing the hurt and not them, not their words. So that is a huge discovery, that it's always about me. Now, from that discovery, from that place of clarity within you, then you could choose to respond. And you could see then much more clearly, not being clouded, your judgment not being clouded by feelings of being hurt and taking it personally and being a victim of that person, right? After you've kind of turned within and just tried to find this person that's hurt. Oh, they're not there. That's just a thought. Okay. And just kind of turn more towards presence. And you might not be able to do this in real time. You might need to kind of move away from that person and kind of reflect on this on your own. Or afterwards, if you couldn't catch it in time, you were just reactive, that's okay. Do it afterwards. Go through this process afterwards. And then in time, you could start doing it in real time. It's a gradual process of learning. But once you've done that, right, and you've turned inwards and you realize that I'm creating this regardless of what it seems, then you can see with more clarity if what you were saying has some validity to it in terms of an actual action to be taken, whatever it is for that relationship, right? And then if that is true, you will more naturally be able to communicate it in a more respectful and less defensive way to the other person, right? Now, that doesn't mean they're going to hear it. They just might be at a place where they're going to be in their own ego. They're going to be super defensive and they're never able to hear it, right? And, that may mean that if that is always the way it's going to be and that person shows no ability to take responsibility for themselves, even when you've reflected on it in silence and realize, no, what they're saying, for instance, is disrespectful or is not correct, then maybe that is not someone you should be having a relationship with. And that could be your soul lesson. I don't know. I can't tell you that. All I can say is you got to go from just trying to figure out who's right, who's wrong, whose opinion's right, to taking all the responsibility inwards for how you feel first, not interpreting everything from the lens of I'm feeling hurt, so that person is wrong. No, I'm feeling hurt, so I'm creating that hurt, period. Now, that person could still be wrong, but at least then I address it from a place of clarity and non-defensiveness. I just address it from being self-respectful to my boundaries, and maybe that person needs to hear something, and maybe I need to set some boundaries, but it's no longer coming from a reactive place. Reactive meaning from your conditioning. Like you said, how do I know it's not what you wrote? Reactive patterns in my brain. It's only reactive patterns in your brain if you're unconsciously identified on a personal level and not being present. So once again, all the practice comes back to disidentifying from the mind as much as possible, being more present as much as possible, which is why meditation helps so much, which is why a daily practice of meditation helps so much, because the more and more you do it, the more you start identifying with your true essence and less with the mind, and the more these things can, become challenges, yes, but not necessarily pure suffering. All right. And that is the real key. So I hope that helps. I hope that makes sense. Please try it. Turn everything inwards first. Don't project responsibility outwards. And then from that place of more clarity, see what happens. And you might be surprised that you don't care anymore who's right or who's wrong. You just want resolution, peace, happiness, much more important than who's right, who's not right. Miracles can happen when we turn our attention inwards and we take responsibility in that way. So I hope that helps, Robin. Thank you for the great questions. And for anyone else who has questions, please send them in to support@soulhub.com. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thank you so much.